So where we left off, we were staring at a deep contradiction. Two completely different stories about Daniel LaPlante's childhood. Was it, like he said himself, pretty good? Or was it, as his defense would later claim, a place of deep psychological abuse?
On one hand, you have the official record, quoting LaPlante directly. On the other, this deeply disturbing narrative of trauma that came out years later. The two just don't add up. They can't both be true. So it forces us to ask, what are we supposed to believe? Or is the truth somewhere else entirely?
You know, for the legal system, this whole debate, nature versus nurture, it kind of became a moot point. The court eventually just set those conflicting stories aside. They concluded that the root of what LaPlante did, it wasn't his environment, and it wasn't just a kid being reckless. No, they turned to a much more clinical and, frankly, a much more unsettling explanation. One that's rooted in pathology.
To really get what happens next, we have to look at this case the same way the court did. We have to put on a forensic, psychological lens. So let's do that. Let's trace how this internal breakdown started to show up on the outside, in real, observable, and escalating behavior.
Okay, so this is the diagnosis from Dr. Fabian Solot that became so central to this whole thing. Conduct disorder. Now, this isn't just about a teenager being rebellious or acting out. We're talking about a persistent, consistent pattern of violating rules, of violating the rights of other people. It goes way beyond normal teenage behavior. It suggests that something much more fundamental is wrong, something in the psychological wiring.
And this right here is the critical point. The things that LaPlante was doing as a teenager, this wasn't just some phase he was going to grow out of. No, it was the start of something. It was the precursor to what would eventually become a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder as an adult. It solidified this lifelong path of pathology, with a deep, profound lack of empathy right at its core.
To even begin to wrap our heads around a trajectory like that, we can look to the field of neurocriminology. Now, this isn't some science fiction idea about finding a single crime gene. It's about understanding the incredibly complex dance between biological predispositions, the brain someone is born with, and the social world they grow up in. It gives us a framework for analyzing how a predator actually develops.
This research from Dr. Adrian Rain, it really paints a stark picture. See that highest bar, the one that's way above the others? It's labeled biosocial. That represents people who have both a biological predisposition and a high-risk social environment. It's the perfect storm. Now, we can't know LaPlante's specific biology, of course, but this gives us the clinical model for understanding how those two things, a troubled mind and a troubled upbringing, can combine to create the most potent risk for violence.
So, with that clinical framework in our minds, let's now look at how this internal pathology actually started to show itself. What were the specific behaviors people saw during his teenage years? These are the first outward symptoms of what's going on inside, the first signs of the escalation to come.
The way people in his community talked about him, well, it paints a very clear picture of someone who just didn't fit in. The words they used? Creepy, loner, disturbed. They all point to this profound disconnect from everyone around him. But here's the really strange part, the contradiction. He had all these diagnosed learning disabilities, right? Dyslexia, ADD, but the court records show that when he was tested, his intelligence was consistently above average. It's like he had this capable mind, but it was just operating on a completely different social and emotional frequency from everybody else.
His criminal path didn't start with violence, not yet. It started with something quieter, something more invasive. It began with intrusion, a calculated series of break-ins during the day, not in some random town, but right there in his own neighborhood. These weren't just about stealing things. This was about crossing thresholds, about violating private spaces. It was about testing how far he could go.
And just look at how fast things accelerated in the fall of 1987. October 14th, he steals guns. That's a huge step. Just a few weeks later, he's caught with one, and he just lies, makes up a story on the spot. And then, in November, we see him at the Gustafson residence, a name that will become tragically central to this story. You see what's happening? He's not just committing random crimes. He's building an arsenal, and he's scouting locations.
This is precisely what the court saw. They recognized that this wasn't some troubled kid just lashing out. His actions were methodical. They were goal-driven. And the goal wasn't just to get cash or valuables. The goal was to exercise control. That's the core psychological need that's pushing all of this forward.
And it's this deep need for control that brings us to the next pivotal escalation.
This is where the focus shifts. It moves from impersonal places, from houses, to a direct, personal, and obsessive intrusion into the life of one specific person.
It all started with something so mundane, so normal, a single date between two teenagers. But for Daniel LaPlante, this brief, normal interaction lit a fuse. It ignited an obsession with 15-year-old Tina Bowen. This wasn't a crush. This was a start of a terrifying, systematic campaign of psychological intrusion.
A sick fascination. I mean, that phrase perfectly captures just how fast this happened. A normal teenage event just spirals. The pathology that was simmering under the surface isn't just internal anymore. It's not about empty houses. Now it has a target, it has a name and a face. Now, it's personal.
And this fixation, it brings up an inevitable and deeply chilling question. For a mind that's driven by this need to control, this need to intrude, what happens when just watching from the outside isn't enough anymore? The answer is a drive to completely erase all boundaries. There's a need to get closer, a need to intrude, and ultimately, a need to possess.